Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 17th of October 2023. Before we go to the map and to the front line, please let me remind you of what all of the lines on my map mean. So check this out, pause it if you need to. And I'm going to actually dip into something I shared with you this morning, but I think it's worth sharing again if you haven't seen my news update. So, propagandist Sladkov is preparing the audience for the lack of any actions by Russia in the coming months and says it needs 5 to 10 times superiority over Ukraine to advance again. Looks like the past year was not just not enough for the second military in the world to accumulate potential. And this is, I think, spot on. Moans about where the Ukrainians are really, where the Russians are really struggling as a Russian propagandist. I won't list all the areas where we need to improve. I will name the main ones: discipline of reality of reports with criminal liability for lies. So let's stop lying about how well we're doing or how badly we're doing. Let's be honest and truthful with our reports. Finally, create and supply modern domestic reconnaissance equipment, military and artillery to the active army. Strengthen the capabilities of aerospace forces, meaning the space area, in supplying intelligence to the fighting groups. Transferring the production of first-person view drones, thermal images, long-range sniper weapons and frontline electronic warfare systems to state lines. Include the military-industrial complex in the process of supplying the army, freeing civil society and responsible businessmen from this. So there's lots of areas to improve, but we need, as it says up here, 5 or better yet 10 times the offensive potential than the Ukrainians' defensive potential, 10 times the troops. And they are just not going to get that without a massive national mobilization. They're not going to get that. Now, they are doing crypto mobilization. They are doing it under the radar, but they will be throwing in poorly trained, poorly equipped soldiers in the main to dilute the force quality that they already have in place in Ukraine. So it's a real challenge for the Russians. At the beginning of the war, they can't win this. I still say they can't win this. We don't even really know their objectives anymore. Their objectives initially were to overthrow the Ukrainian government within 3 days and get rid of Zelensky. That didn't happen, and they didn't have a plan B. And so they accidentally got stuck in a war. It was a special military operation. It's now a war, and it has been since the first week. And they're not prepared for that, and they haven't been prepared for that. They didn't do their suppression of enemy air defense activities long enough. They didn't do them well enough, and so there's a contested airspace. They just can't win, and the only way it looks like they think they can win is by throwing humans into battle. But as this person says, they need 5-10 times more to do the kind of offensives that they think they need. Right, going back to the northeast, to the map, to the northeastern sector, you've got Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna down here. That's where we're going to go to first. Not an awful lot to report from this sector. No report says the enemy has not given up offensive actions in the Kupiansk direction. And this is Yevlash, the Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson. Now, before I continue with what he says, I've been wondering whether people who are the spokespeople or the commanders of different regions are often playing a PR game against other regions. I'll be interested in what you have to say. This is massively speculative from me, but somehow I get the impression that Yevlash is thinking, or the commanders are thinking, this is a zero-sum game, right? There's only so many troops that the central command can give to any given area, right? They've got, say, we've got 20,000 troops. And so each commander wants more troops for their area, and they want to be able to defend it as best as possible. They want more troops to be able to do offensive operations. So they think, right, if another area gets 10,000 troops, I don't get those 10,000. Right? It's not that they can get all. If 20,000 go down to the southern, there's only 20,000 troops to draw from, and all 20,000 go down to the southern front line, then I get 0. Their gain is my lack. Not maybe taken away from me, but their gain means that I get nothing. Therefore, I need to use my spokespeople to shout about how bad it is in my particular area, to, to give the heebie-jeebies to Central Command so they send me some troops. Because we've heard so often from particularly this area, the northeastern sector, you hear all these scare claims about however many 100,000 troops is all going to be terrible. They're going to attack. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. Is this just an attempt to get those resources? So he says the enemy is not giving up offensive action. In the Kupiansk direction, because now at any cost they have the task of capturing the city before the onset of cold weather, before the onset of bad autumn weather. However, we have reliable fortifications there. We have a powerful fortified area that is not that will not allow the opponent to pass so easily. And then when we dip into the ISW, they say military analyst Petro Chermik stated that Russian forces are concentrating 100,000 personnel in the Kupiansk-Liman direction to distract Ukrainian forces from ongoing offensive operations near Bakhmut. Chermik stated that the Russian forces may achieve partial success in that direction, but will need to commit significant forces to capture territory. I don't know whether my speculation makes any sense at all, but I just often get the idea that each area is trying to scare either the general public or the central command into some kind of more like the central command for some kind of action. Yeah. So anyway, potentially, as we've heard, not for the first time, 100,000 troops in this area, although they won't all be frontline troops. Right, let's come down now to the Bakhmut area. Oh, there's activity in all the usual places: Serebiansky Forest, Torska, and so on and so forth. Nadia and this area poking out near Svatova, Novoherivka, still activity around there. Right, we'll come down to Bakhmut now, where we will pop into the ISW, see if there's anything particularly important to say. Actually, the ISW says neither side has confirmed gains in Bakhmut, although the mappers will disagree, but that doesn't necessarily mean it happened in the last 24 hours, of course. So in the southern Bakhmut area, the area that we've seen the Ukrainians have a lot of success over the last few weeks, over the last month really, the Ukrainians are continuing to capitalize on the momentum they've gathered there. No movement north of Bakhmut, but as you can see, all the mappers here. So Deep State map has a slight gain for the Ukrainians, or pushing the Russians back. On the other side of the railway, it's basically from here to there, has the Russians pushed back in that area, which I think is more significant than one might think. This has been a particularly difficult area of fighting. Russians have been pushed back north of the railway, then have pushed the Ukrainians back, and there's been this push and shove. If the Ukrainians can get the Russians over the other side, as is indicated here by Deep State map, then I think that's significant going forward. And then down the eastern side of Klishchivka, pushing to the east across the railway, the Ukrainians have had more success again, as according to Andrew Perpetua here. So quite some gains there. It's about that much gainage. And then some for Suryat maps as well in this general area, a little push there. And then north of Zelenopilya and Kurdyumivka, an important gain here. Both maps indicating slightly different gains, or slightly different amounts of gain there, but certainly useful for the Ukrainians. So as we look at some of the sources, this is Global War Monitor saying Ukraine has captured 2 smaller reservoirs near the railway line that joins Andriivka, Klishchivka, and those are these 2 small reservoir areas, according to them. I mean, Andrew Perpetua and Deep State map are way to the east of there by now. Suryat maps not quite caught up, I don't think. Dmitry from War Translated says interesting information about the south of Bakhmut that needs verifying, but nevertheless states that the defensive nodes south of Bakhmut are being pushed by Ukrainians who are already establishing behind the railway line in the areas of Andriivka and Klishchivka. Russian command in the area is said to be very poor and unwilling. There's a follow-up post that insults towards a former commander in the area, Suchevoy, who was removed from his position sometime in September, who allegedly lost 1,500 people in September in the area, killed and wounded. I took the liberty of drawing roughly where the new defensive line was, according north on Morgonzo. And this is what I talked about yesterday, this post, but I didn't get a chance really to go through it. But I will now. So since I myself, and this is a Russian source, as a vigilant citizens who follow my decadent writings know, am prone to whipping up a panic psychosis, probably in the interest of the enemy, who is obviously neither in sleep nor in spirit about his own advances, I will quote the weekly report from War Gonzo. Bakhmut direction, south of the city, the Russian armed forces found themselves in an extremely difficult situation. The armed forces of Ukraine focus their main efforts on storming Kurdyivka, where the last heights controlled by Russian troops are located. Where they are located, the Ukrainian units cannot occupy them, but in the area of Andriivka and Klishchiivka, they managed to gain a foothold at the railway line. Attempts by the Russian forces to fight back those positions didn't bring success. Their loss is now forcing Russian forces to build our defense along the Nikolaevka, Vitoraya, Otradivka, Ivanhrad, along the highway to Horlivka. North of Bakhmut, the intensity of fights decreased significantly. Based on the quote above, I would like to note the following. So just to let you know, this is moving to this defensive line on the road there, and that the north is somewhat quieter. The intensity of fighting on the northern flank has now really decreased. The enemy's main efforts are concentrated in the south, where he is able to achieve advancement. At the same time, he risks for the northern section have not been eliminated. It cannot be ruled out that there will be a repetition of breakthrough attempts similar to the surge of the second 10 days in August. The settlements along which our new line of defense is being built are listed from south to north, i.e. in a direction of Horlivka to Bakhmut, but this is not the point. The nuance is important. The village of Ivanhrad is already located beyond Bakhmutka and is a safety option in case the enemy develops success northeast of Klishchiivka in a direction of Opitny. So we have Opitny here, we have Ivanhrad there. That might well be under threat as the Ukrainians push to the east, and that will then allow the Ukrainians to get a greater opportunity to encircle Bakhmut much more closely. It's going to be this road is going to be significant. There are heights to contend with around here as well that will play a role. In the area of Klishchiivka and Andriivka, the enemy managed to gain a foothold not just near the railway line, but in some places already behind the enemy line. So Wargonzo said that the Ukrainians got purchase at the railway line, or actually, as you can see from several of the mappers here, the claims are that extends way to the east of the railway line. And then, as our artillery works, but there are some nuances. Part of the ammo is spent on frankly unusable objects. In particular, artillery is pouring into the ruins where small groups are rummaging around, while the enemy concentrates the main forces in the adjacent tree lines. There is no proper interaction with the infantry. Assault operations do not receive appropriate artillery support, or there is no artillery support at all. In addition, the lack of normal communication with sad frequency leads to friendly fire, plus, of course, the inevitable failure of counter-battery combat. Accordingly, it's interesting where they say the inevitable failure. That they seem to be accepting now that counter-battery fire is just not a thing for the Russians. They are failing to be able to do it. Failing to be able to track Ukrainian artillery shells landing such that they can hit where those artillery shells came from, which means that the Russians are having their own artillery degraded, as Ukrainian counter-battery fire seems to be working fine, thank you very much. But the Ukrainians are not having their artillery being degraded to the same level, and that will possibly start snowballing. And we're seeing the complaint so often that as you see here, it's the inevitable failure of counter-battery combat. Accordingly, our counterattacks regularly fail, and the assault infantry suffers excessive losses, which are very difficult and hard to process. Our defences in the Kurdyivka sector are holding up for now. This is the last section of the Klishchiivka line, which is of particular importance due to the terrain, hence the enemy's pressure. Everything is logical. In general, I dare to note that Wargunzo now turns out to be perhaps our only major channel that has decided to directly outline the problem. On the southern flank of Bakhmut, our troops are really in an extremely difficult situation. So this is like laying it on thick and saying, what we hear so often, but it's playing into the Ukrainian hands in the south of Bakhmut, where they're continuing to make their advances. The Syriac Maps pro-Russian mapper says Ukraine secured the last area close to Andriivka, located west of the railway. At the same time, the Russian army continued retreating from the railway towards eastern positions, in other words, towards this road. So that is another source to suggest things aren't going too well for the Ukrainians there. Right, we're going to go to Avdiivka now, where the Russians have made gains, which was expected given the size of the attacks. This is further to the south. Given the size of the attacks, exactly what you'd expect. More success, it appears, to the south around Opitny Vodyany area, or Vodyany particularly, Pervomysky north of there, and indeed to the west. And then also in the Spartak area, as according to Deep State Map. Now, some of this might just be catching up with what happened 2 or 3 days ago. So it might not be that this is 2 days of this is 24 hours of success. So Deep State Map has that area towards the road that Suryat Maps indicated was taken by the Russians and then expanded. Deep State Map seems to agree with that there. And then as we come over to the west, Andrew Perpetua has, so Andrew Perpetua's lines are the blue lines. There's lots of lines around here. Let's turn off the pre-counter-offensive line from Deep State Map. We'll turn that off just to make it a little bit clearer. The yellow line is Deep State, red line is Suryat Maps, and the blue line is Andrew Perpetua. And the blue line here, this increase of the Russian control is that brown field there, that dark brown field there. That is what Andrew Perpetua sees as being the increase. For Deep State Maps, and increases over in this area by Vodyany just a little bit. It was more aligned to that red line below it. And then just over in this sector here, where there's both of them agree that there's a bit of this tree line going north, has been taken by the Russians. And then Suryat Maps pretty much added most of this area on. So differing gains, a few different places and to differing quantities, but nonetheless, some gains for the Russians there. But at what cost, as we talked about so much. So Andrew Perpetua, as I mentioned yesterday, said, I posted a map update. It was a large number of green eyeballs, 57 of them in total. The most interesting were around Novomykhailivka, which is where the Russian focused their Avdiivka offensive. He also pointed out a number of huge shells. So when he's talking about shelling, these are clusters of large numbers of shells that give you a brown patch on the satellite imagery that you say, right, they've been shelling there, or they've been shelling this tree line. You can see it's complete. It's not the same brown as underneath, and you've got no longer got the green that was going through there. So those trees have been completely taken apart. But when you see something like this, that's just one single, possibly crater there. He's wondering what the hell that is. Is that one massive missile that's caused that crater? You've got larger ones here. These have been multiple launch rocket system explosions, the larger ones, and these will be probably as well. You've also got aviation that drops there. But is this an FAB 1500 that's hit around here? And then all the rest of these will be, accumulation of artillery shells. But the size of that, and it's not the only one. There's a number of those that you found around Avdiivka, particularly around Novomykhailivka. Just unsure what they are, as you can see here. He's questioning, and then seeing the attack. What he does is measure these every day that satellite imagery comes out. He is looking at it, comparing it to the day before, the previous satellite imagery pictures, to see what has happened. And to you and I, we might look at that and go, "God, it's just a load of brown fields." But he's like, right, we know that there's attacking here. We know that the Ukrainians were holding this, so the Russians are trying to attack them in order to move forward. It means the Ukrainians still control this land, or whatever. I don't know exactly for these images, but that's kind of how it works. And he's now started live streaming him putting the green eyeballs on, which are these eyeballs on his map that give you these images that you can then think about. Again, with the enormous crater, I have no idea what it is, but the rest of the shelling is so intense, it's obvious to see. I don't even need to circle anything. So as you can see from this image, this would be multiple launch rockets, larger ones, or be FABs, and then some effusive one there Not sure. So that's around Novomykolivka. And he said, oh, and just an FYI, there's absolutely no evidence of any fighting in the area that Rebar said. So Rebar, remember, said that there was attacking across the Berdichi and coming down here. Well, there's no satellite imagery of that, as I said previously, but there is an awful lot of satellite imagery of activity taking place around Novomykolivka. And this is where he was saying that, and indeed there's a gain up through this tree line here, just this kind of area for Andrew Perpetua for the Russians, and that could be part of this whole like hammer Novomykolivka, really, expend a lot of artillery ammunition, taking out these Ukrainian positions in the tree lines here, there, and everywhere, in the hope that they can take that and level off this front line. Whilst at the same time they were doing these large mechanized attacks north and south of Avdiivka to try and sort of close the neck of the cauldron there. As we said before, well, this is another Tatarigami summary actually. So this was from the 16th. Yesterday, I didn't get to read this out. Russian forces failed to maintain a lasting presence north of Avdiivka despite their initial advances, says Tatarigami. In the early days of the assault, Russians were unable to establish permanent control over the slag heap. So the slag heap is here. I'm going to show you a little video of the slag heap to show you. This is what Suryat Maps and Rebar was saying was taken. And you can see why it was really unlikely that this was taken, especially coming from this angle. So if you, let's try and get you to look at this. I'm not very good at controlling. Now, I don't know what the 3D rendering will be like on this on Google Earth, but we are now looking southwards. So Avdiivka, that's towards where they made the gains to the south of Avdiivka. This is the slag heap there. We're going to try and see if we can get in there and see how tall this slag heap is. So you can get some sense there of how difficult it would be to assault that. You're not going to get mechanized equipment up there. You can crawl up there, but this is it'll all tumble down. Here it is as seen on reporting from Ukraine.
Some Russian sources published a video showing exactly what Russian soldiers saw when they went to storm basically a huge flat wall. Moreover, Ukrainians equipped it with machine gun positions and did not let the Russian infantry get close. Russians opened fire at Ukrainian machine gun positions from tanks and ATGMs, but could not sustain it for a long time as they quickly got targeted with artillery or drones. Eventually, only one Russian soldier managed to get to the mountain. He managed to climb almost 3/4 of the distance to the first floor before losing his life. So the attack on Tarikon was a complete catastrophe. US National Security Council spokesman John Kirby commented on the recent developments in Avdiivka and stated that Russian forces once again resorted to human wave tactics, wherein the Russian military uses masses of poorly trained and equipped Russian soldiers to attempt to advance, just like during the failed offensive last year. In the meantime,
I think that's really good imagery there of this slag heap and how difficult that would be to take. I mean, if the Ukrainians controlled this, and this is why many people were saying that they didn't take it. They just didn't take it because that would be completely unrealistic for them to be able to take that in the way and in the time that was claimed by people like Rebar. So that didn't happen. Anyway, as Tatarigami says, they're unable to take the slag heap and get permanent control. Good news is emerging from the southwestern flank. Despite numerous efforts to break through to Severny, Russian forces incurred significant losses and were forced to retreat. This is very important as the western flank plays a crucial role in Avdiivka's logistics. This is to say that the Russians have failed to reach Severny from here, but they are getting closer, as according to Suryat Maps and indeed Deep State Map over in this area, a little bit here. So can't confirm how far, if at all, the Russians have moved forward, but they may well have moved forward towards Tonyenki and Severny, and indeed towards towards the west over here, by north of Pervomaisky. So that is slightly worrying, but again, the question is at what cost? Reports of numerous destroyed vehicles are accurate, but I want to highlight that some of these destroyed vehicles were situated there in previous months or even years. Nonetheless, the losses remain significant, with a somewhat reduced intensity in recent days. Recent satellite imagery and geolocated videos reveal that the enemy has shifted their approach in Avdiivka, resorting to heavy bombardment and causing extensive damage to the city's infrastructure and residential buildings. I think they've kind of calmed down on the attacks. Avdiivka, says Dmitry, a Russian serviceman walks around destroyed Russian equipment and bodies just 5 kilometers away from Avdiivka, providing nonchalant commentary on what he can see. As the source points out, the location is in the north section of the Russian offensive behind enemy lines now. Of course, I can't show this to you, but it appears to be well behind the Russian lines that's been, Russian held for a long time, since winter 2022, actually winter 22 to 23. Spots been in Russian hands for months, since May, I believe. If these losses are recent, it backs some of the rumors which have been circulating that Ukrainian artillery managed to get the jump on Russian columns, causing heavy casualties before they even reached the front line. So it's basically really heavy losses. There's so much footage coming out, so the amount of Russian scrap metal near Avdiivka is piling up. Another attempt of the Russian army to break through the lines using several armoured vehicles, trashing them all. There is even a turret toss included. You can go and check this footage out. Unfortunately, I can't show it to you, but there's just a lot of footage of vehicles getting absolutely hammered, and those attacks have been geolocated to here, a number of geolocations, which is what the ISW says of this. It indicates some success, some gains for the Russians. Additional geolocated footage posted on October 16th showed that Russian forces have advanced to the tree line south of Novomykhailivka, and a Ukrainian, so that's actually further to the south, a Ukrainian reserve officer noted that Russian forces are increasingly resorting to heavy air artillery strikes on infrastructure within Avdiivka due to heavy Ukrainian fortifications around the settlement there that are making it difficult for Russian troops to advance. And it says, as you can imagine, there are contradictory claims about what is going on in at the slag heap there. It talks about geolocated footage showing that the Russians have advanced. So let's have a look at some of the geolocations here. And yeah, that's the Novomykhailivka ones, which would suggest that this tree line, that'll be what Andrew Perpetua's based the control of that tree line change there. It was here, and they just moved that forward to controlling that, and that'll be based on this kind of footage. And we'll see if there is anything else of significance to look at. Another geolocation, yeah, pretty close to that as well. So, yeah, that does indicate gains for the Russians in that area. And let's see if there's any others. So this is the geolocated claims of marginal Russian advances, or Russian advances on the northern outskirts of marginally advanced part of U50 road south of Avdiivka, and that is some drone footage of Ukrainians dropping drones on Russian positions, which means the Russians must indeed be there, and that equates to here. So again, this is the evidence that this whole area there, so Deep State Maps moved their mapping to include that. We've got Andrew Perpetua increasing the mapping there previously, and then Syriac Maps again increasing the mapping in that area. So there is good evidence to suggest that indeed these areas are under control of Russians. Just one more. If there's anything else to no, that's further back there, which was already under control, so that's nothing unusual there. Right, so now we are going to move out of that area, and not going to go into Street view. No need for that. Right, and then as I say, there's just huge amounts of footage. Again, more footage of repelled Russian attacks coming from different sources. Just stuff getting blown up, people in all sorts of trouble. It was just a really expensive area in terms of Russian losses, as you can see here. A lot of equipment strewn. It was a Russian convoy, and yeah, that's that footage previously. That was geolocated. So, just almost finally here, Avdiivka, Russian mill bloggers are beginning to understand the real situation. Day 7, well, that's it. We're stuck. We can't move on. They immediately cut us out of everything. Occupied positions are bombarded with cassettes. So those are cluster munitions, mines, and drones. In the afternoon, thank God, it started to rain, and the enemy was left without eyes. We are. The rain is no problem for cassettes, but we don't have cassettes. There are still problems with counter battery fire. The guys on the front are sitting in the cracks. You literally can't raise your head. They're hurricanes, sunny days. Where are you? F this Royal Hunt already. Help us. For now, we are keeping busy, but it's very difficult, very difficult. If there is not the same powerful artillery barrage as on the first day, we will get stuck here. I know everyone is waiting for victorious reports, but the picture is a little damn it different. We do not export without heavy artillery. Just calling for the heavy artillery they started that attack with, supposedly the 200 guns that were hammering the Ukrainians, although that was what was Andrew Perpetua was calling into question because he could find no great evidence of that. And here, Suriyat Map says the Russians are making important advances west of Pervomaysky and reaching Novoavdiivsky Pond, and northwest of Vodyane, taking control over a series of hills and positions located 2 kilometers from Tonyenki. Okay, right. So that's that. As I say, there's lots of activity going on around Novomykhailivka. It's very quiet around Velika Novosilka. Both sides are saying it's quietened down there, as according to the ISW. Then we come to Robotyne area, and again, it's pretty quiet there. You can see in terms of movement on the map. It's not to say it's actually quiet in terms of fighting. Yes, so Russian sources, including Russian MOD, claim that Ukrainian forces launched an unsuccessful mechanized assault on Verbovy's eastern and northwestern outskirts. This was, I think, detailed by reporting from Ukraine. The video today, this morning, talks about this and how I was saying yesterday they had pushed into Verbove, the Ukrainians, or at least pushed the Russians back here. And now there's a change, as according to Andrew Perpetua, that the Ukrainians are now, or the Russians have regained control over the very outskirts of Verbove. Again, so that looks to be the repelled attack that's being mentioned here. One Russian mill blogger claimed that the intensity of the Ukrainian assaults on Verbove subsided due to bad weather, which we've heard elsewhere. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces are within 200 to 300 meters of each other in Verbove. We'll now go and look at a few. So this is a geolocation as according to the ISW. So geolocated footage published on the 15th indicates that Russian forces marginally advanced northwest of Verbove, and this talks about the details of the bold breakthrough of the assault group of the airborne forces on the BMD-4 along the defense line northwest of Verbove, and talks about how wonderfully the Russian troops did. The landing of troops was carried out directly into the stronghold of the enemy armed forces of Ukraine under the cover of fire from airborne combat vehicles. Then the mopping up of positions of the assault group began. Close battle ensued. Survivors were asking to surrender, so on and so forth. That's what the Russians say of this particular area, and they are claiming. I can't show you that video, unfortunately, but that is from just here. And that is why Suriyat Maps has that, I would assume, has that advancement for the Russians in exactly the area we were talking about. So it appears that the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back in a counterattack there. And that's pretty much it for the front line. I mean, there are differing claims about success around Kopane. We saw the potential use of JDAMs or something. similar in the Novoprokopivka area, but I think weather being a little bit problematic over the last 24 hours has meant maybe a bit quieter than it might have otherwise been because drones are unable to operate as effectively. But yeah, we'll see. That's the Frontline update for today. Hopefully that was of use. And of course, there's been huge success at Berdyansk. I've done a breaking news update on the attack with ATACMS at Berdyansk. It's on my A Tippling Philosopher channel. Go and check that out. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Toodle bits.